wonderful. And we are live and welcome to the Hardcore Soft Skills podcast. I'm very happy today that we have an amazing guest today, David Berke, who is a real life Top Gun. David Berke is a retired U.S. Marine Corps officer, Top Gun instructor, and now a leadership instructor and speaker at Echelon Front, where he serves as the Chief Development Officer. And he's also the writer of the book, The Need to Lead, which we'll talk about today. And it just came out, and it's a great, fascinating read, as we were I was mentioning earlier and before the interview. It's a great read to understand for myself that I'm non-military and not a pilot, to understand all the details about military life as well. So welcome, Dave, to the show.
Yadi, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
And it's great to have you because I want to go ahead and learn. You bring to the book a lot of the real life lessons that you've got from the military. But let's start from the beginning in terms of why did you decided to join the military?
Well, I don't have any history in my family, so I happened to just very randomly when I was young, about 5 years old, my parents moved to a town in Southern California called El Toro. And this is back in the late 70s, a long time ago. But back then, there was a big Marine base literally about a mile from where I moved randomly. So this Marine base was the West Coast Fighter Base. And so from about 5, 6 years old on, if I looked up in the sky, there were Marine jets taking off and landing, and I saw it every day. And I think at that age, it just got in my bloodstream and it just set me on the path of wanting to be a Marine pilot.
And not any just marine pilot, because you've also entered into the toughest schools and decided to become an instructor, a Top Gun instructor as well. How was that process of entering, of becoming an instructor, or the challenges that you had to endure during that time?
Yeah, and obviously, you don't get to decide if you want to do that. It's something that just happens, has to work out some timing and some circumstance, and you have to be asked to come back. And so, a lot of what I thought about wasn't, what do I do to become a Top Gun instructor? It was really from the very beginning of my career, no matter what I was doing, is what do I need to do to be successful, to learn, to grow, to develop, and then put myself in a position that if opportunities continue to become presented to me, I could take advantage of those opportunities. So you start with getting commission, then you go to flight school, then you get into jets, then you get into fighters, you get into carrier squadron, and things keep moving. And at each phase, you have to compartmentalize on what you're doing. Work hard, try to do your best, learn as much as you can, and you want to prepare yourself for the inevitable opportunity that we can't control, but that you can be prepared for that opportunity. So when it presents itself, you take advantage of it. And I was super lucky to go as a student at Top Gun, and then even more lucky to be asked to come back to be an instructor. It's a classic example of preparation and luck and timing all kind of intersecting for my benefit. It worked out really well.
And what were some of the, I guess, misconceptions that you've had before when you were about to enter, getting ready and preparing, and once you were part of the group
Yeah.
of people?
Well, Top Gun is a unique, unique place. And I would be lying if I didn't tell you that I didn't love the movie, both Top Gun movies. I love them. But probably the biggest misperception or misconception that people have is that the students go there and they're somehow as capable or effective as the instructors. I think they portrayed Maverick in that first movie as, pretty darn good on the airplane and making the instructors work. That's not the real world. When I showed up as a student, I wasn't anywhere near the caliber and capability of the instructor. So there's a very big disparity, and that's okay. It doesn't mean they're better people. It doesn't even mean they're better pilots. It means they're more experienced and better trained. And it shows as a student how far you actually still have to grow. So when you arrive as a student, you have a long road ahead of you, a lot of room to improve. And I think the misperception is that students show up kind of at the top of their game. The instructors are very much at the top of their game, and the students know from very early on you have a long way to go to get to your optimal capability. So that was a pretty big difference from what people might think to what really goes on in reality.
Yeah, interesting. So all the scenes that we saw, just people nailing it initially, were not necessarily
Not
that.
happening. No, not happening.
Yeah. So let's talk about leadership, because what were also from your perspective as you started leading others into either as a instructor or as a leader in the military, what were some of your misconceptions as well in terms
Yeah.
of what a leader should be?
It's such a good question because I had this very specific goal, this very specific dream. I wanted to fly an F-18. I wanted to be a single seat aircraft. I wanted to be on a carrier. And a lot of it in your head, you build this up as if this is really, you are kind of the centerpiece of what's going on. It's not hard for your ego to start to tell you, hey, this is all about you and how good are you in the airplane and how good are you in that jet. And when I finished training, when I finished everything, and I was selected to fly single seat F-18s in a carrier squadron, basically overnight when I show up in a regular squadron, what I realize is it is not about me. It is about my ability to contribute to the squadron, my ability to lead the Marines and be a good teammate. And there's a bit of a barrier of your ego thinking, oh, you're the center of the world. You're a single seat F-18 pilot. This is all about you. And it is not about you. It is undeniably about the team. And it took me a while to realize I was there not for myself. I was there to be a member of the team. And again, that's a misconception a little bit that I had because everything was about my performance in the jet. Well, when you get to a squadron, your performance in the jet is expected to be good. It's really about how well you can lead the people around you. And I had to learn that. I had to learn that the hard way for sure.
Yeah, and there's a quote or a portion in the book that you talk about that transition in. I think it said something along the lines of somebody giving you feedback that you will be the best platoon leader if you didn't know how already if you didn't know
Yeah.
who you were already, or something along those
Yeah,
lines.
I can tell you the direct quote if you want it. I've
Yes,
lived
please.
that's burned in my head. I was a second lieutenant at the basic school. It was my very first professional job as a Marine. I was competing to become a pilot or get a flight school spot, and I was doing really well on paper. My ranking was really good, and my platoon commander brought me in and it gave me what's called the peer review, what my peers thought of me. And the quote was Lieutenant Burke would be one of the best officers in the platoon if he didn't already think that he was. And that was his way of revealing to me that what my teammates thought of me was I was a pretty judgmental teammate. And if you weren't doing well, instead of helping you, I was criticizing you. And I had this impression that I was awesome and doing great and that I was one of the best guys. And that's what came through. And it's not a good attribute. It was a lesson on humility. Thank God I learned it so early in my career. But it was an indicator that my ego had gotten out of control. I wrote about it in the book. It's a very embarrassing, humbling story to tell, but I thought it was important that I had painted this picture like, I'm awesome. Everybody else must think I'm awesome. And they didn't, obviously. And I had to learn to keep my ego in check. Tough lesson.
And it's very important that you mentioned that, because thinking of for those of us working in the corporate world or other areas, when it comes to becoming a manager or a leader of a team, and you want to make sure that my team is the best, and you think that by criticizing folks or letting them know you're doing this wrong, that
Yeah.
that's the way to go, or getting rid of the quote unquote low performers, that's going to drive your team to success. So what you're saying here is that basically it's helping the team to become better. How do you identify
Yeah.
that a person is good enough to kind of succeed?
Yeah, Yadi, it's such a good question. And I think it's a good narrative too on sometimes we fall into the trap, especially if we are part of a team. We think, oh, if Yadi's struggling and not doing well, that makes me look good. And that's the exact opposite of how you should perceive it. If you have someone on your team that's struggling, who's underperforming, not delivering, maybe having a hard time, what that person needs is help. What that person needs is your support. What that person needs is a stronger relationship with you. And I think it's true for a couple of different reasons. One is that's just quite simply what they need. But two is one thing that I've learned is that those roles will eventually reverse. I'm not going to be great at everything. I'm not going to be good at all the things I try to do. And some point, you're going to be doing well and I'm going to be struggling. And what I need from you is your help. And that's what a team is. And so the priority really should be is build the strongest relationships we can, try to help each other as often as possible, and collaboratively and collectively we'll create a culture by which If you're struggling, that means I have to help you. And if you're doing well, then that will benefit me, which means the whole team wins. And you don't gain advantage by people on your team underperforming. You gain advantage by getting the best out of everyone. And the only way that happens is through good relationships. And so the ultimate lesson for me is if people on your team are struggling, they need your help. They don't need your judgment. And that was the trap I had fallen into. And that has held true throughout my career. When I help my teammates, they do better. They help me, I do better. Then the team wins. And that's as simple as you can put it. That's what it's about.
That's a very key lesson right there of helping your team succeed and creating that culture. That's a very important what you mentioned there. So, if for those people who are now in managerial roles or are leaders, what's the first key skill that you think they should start developing?
Yeah, if you find yourself elevating into an organizational leadership role where you have a team and you've got a responsibility, maybe a product that you're responsible for, an outcome or some sort of deliverable, the number one thing you are there to do, the number one thing you're there to do is take care of your team. Take care of your people. Now, that doesn't mean make things easy for them and set a low bar. Taking care of them makes setting high expectations and high demands and high performance. But when I talk about taking care of your people, is you have to demonstrate that you care about them, and you have to build a good relationship. You have to show that you trust them. You have to treat them with respect. You have to listen to them. You have to let them lead and let them grow and make decisions and let them influence you. Your job as a leader is to take care of your team. If you take care of your team, I know it sounds cliche, I know it sounds simple, but they will take care of you. Your best chance in a managerial leadership role for your team to succeed is to take care of them as people, set a high standard, set a high bar, prepare them, train them, resource them, but put them in a position in which the team cares about each other. That team can accomplish a lot of things. That's your job as a leader.
You mentioned listening, and that's a skill that, for as I've discovered on this podcast, is very underrated and difficult to master as well. So,
Yeah.
how do you suggest that we become better listeners with our teammates?
Well, you're asking these questions, and I love the way you're asking them because I think it does two things. It reminds me of why I wrote about it in the book. And as you alluded to earlier, that there's a story about listening, and it's a story about me not listening. So all these stories are super embarrassing. They're very humbling. I hate having to look back and recognize that I fell short of these things. But when I reflect back on that and I think about it, the answer, I know it's a simple answer. And the answer is you need to talk less and listen more. And one of the traps that I fell into, which is very common, I think, for leaders, is when you're in charge, you think, oh, I should be doing the talking. That's the intuitive, normal, ego driven reaction. But if you find yourself in a leadership role, the way to cultivate better listening is you have to listen more. And it's a little counterintuitive to think, what is my job as a leader? It's not to stand up and bark orders and tell the team what to do. It's actually to listen to what's on the team's mind. Hey, Yadi, what do you think? How do you see this? What do you want to do here? What is it from your perspective? And the more I listen, obviously, the stronger that relationship gets. But the more I actually learn. And at some point as a leader, you can embrace the idea that if you listen more and talk less, that will help everybody around you. And our natural tendency is we all talk too much. So
Mhm.
stop talking and just do some listening.
Yeah, and you mentioned about embarrassing experiences, but want to hear a couple of those. Is there a particular experience that you consider that transform your either vision of leadership, but also or adapting to change, because that's something that a lot of us are struggling with
Yeah.
right now. So any experience or lessons that you've learned along the way that you mind sharing?
Yeah, well, you mentioned that comment about change, and all the things that I wrote about the 10 chapters, each one is a story of just some spectacular shortcoming or some failure, some mistake. We just hit two of them. One was I had built this habit of not listening. I was talking too much. I had a very habit early on where my ego got out of control and I was judgmental of other people. We talked about those too. But you mentioned that concept of change. There's something that really stands out. I wrote about it somewhere in the middle of the book about I had a pretty successful career. I'd flown different fighters, F-18s and F-16s. I was a Top Gun instructor. I was the senior instructor, Top Gun. I got selected for this incredible job to fly F-22s for the Air Force, the only Marine. It all looked great on paper. And when I got there to start flying this brand new, modern, ultra capable fighter, I had a really hard time transitioning to this new platform because I had a really hard time accepting that I needed to change. I had convinced myself that my resume and my success and my selection to this F-22 job was proof that all the things I had done to earn that spot were the things that were going to continue to create success for me. And so when I got into the F-22 initially, I was really resistant to changing the way I flew. And what that led to was huge problems for me because what I was doing stopped working. I wasn't doing a good job learning and listening and understanding from the advice of other people that had already done this. And I really struggled in my first couple of months flying the F-22 because I was really resistant to change. Leaders that don't change struggle. Organizations that don't change will fail over time. Change is critical. Innovate, adapt, open mindedness, listening, evolving. But boy, I tell you, I learned that does not come easy. That is something we really resist. Most people, myself included, really resist change, and that's one thing that you cannot do. You have to be open minded to change. I learned that the hard way at a late stage of my career, but that has stayed with me as leaders have to evolve, companies have to evolve, people have to evolve, and that does not come easy.
Absolutely, and big example of that, because I work with military and former military veterans, and they've always mentioned about that transition from the military life into the civilian world. Since a lot of the listeners are experiencing that transition right now, what do you recommend for folks who are military who transition to civilian life, or even other folks who are experiencing different transitions that they new companies, new industries, or things along those
Yeah.
lines?
Yeah, you're creating a great image of a scenario that I think all veterans struggle with, and transitioning from the military lifestyle to the civilian lifestyle can be a challenge. But I think, Yanni, you brought up a great point too. It isn't just that transition. It doesn't matter what industry you're in or where your background is, military or not. Change is something we struggle with. And I think if there's a phrase that comes to mind that I think is really central to my military folks moving from the military world to the civilian world is try to be open minded. You are going to be presented with very different ways to accomplish things that you've been really successful at in your military career. And sometimes we can get set in our ways, especially if they've led to our success. Oftentimes we say, oh, this worked. I was successful here. I got promoted. I got this experience, or these things happen to me. That is the way to do it. And that becomes sometimes the only way to do it. And that can be a challenge. Try to be as open minded and be willing to see the perspective from other folks. And what you will discover, and what I discovered is when I moved into the civilian world, is man, there's a lot of different ways to accomplish things that I have a somewhat narrow view of, like, oh, this is how we do that. I did that in the Marine Corps for 23 years. I know the answer, and that can create some problems. Try to be as open minded to not just the experience of transitioning and have a broad range of opportunities, but be open minded how other people like to solve the same problems you've been doing, even if you've been successful at doing it. That open mindedness will help you in that transition. And by the way, like you said, it helps in all aspects of life.
Yeah, so definitely the willingness to learn and that
Yeah.
humility as well that you mentioned are very important. Particularly as change right now is so exponential with technology or just industries. It's just we have to be more willing to learn than ever. And another key aspect of the book that you mentioned is the very beginning, because when I first read the title in terms of the need to lead, I was thinking that it was referring to like, as individuals, we want to be leaders, or made me think of, are there people that are born to lead and others that are not great leaders? And you mentioned that everybody is a leader in some way. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the things I'm super lucky to be able to have done with this book is build on the foundation. Our company, Echelon Front, really was built on a book called Extreme Ownership, which came out 10 years ago, written by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. It's an amazing book, really foundational. And as our company grew and started teaching these principles, we started to incorporate more lessons that we learned. And one of the lessons that we figured out very early on was a lot of times we go work with companies to do leadership training. We are a leadership consultancy. We teach leadership. Is people thought, oh, that's for my boss, or that's for the supervisors, or that's for the managers. And it was like, no, 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 no. Leadership is everybody. Every single human being is a leader. And I think there's a little bit of hurdle for us to get over, which is leadership isn't about your job or your title or your rank, but also leadership isn't something that's bestowed upon you by that title. Like leadership is a skill. So it's not just that everybody's a leader, it's that leadership is a skill that can be learned by everybody. And by the way, it has to be. And we'd have people that we'd talk to and they'd think, they'd put, let's say you're their boss and they'd say, oh, Yadi's an amazing leader. I'll put her up on a pedestal. And we say, hey, by the way, everything Yadi's good at in leadership, she learned that. She wasn't born with that. None of that is given to us from birth. It's not genetic. These are things that we learn. And so if Yadi can learn it and be such a great leader, that means you can too. And it was really important to me at the very beginning is to talk about those core beliefs. Everybody is a leader. Leadership exists in every capacity. It's not just work, it's at home, it's in communities, within yourself. Every problem is a leadership problem, literally every single one. And most importantly, in this regard, is leadership is a skill that can be taught and learned by everybody. So it does not matter what your talent is, what your capability, from birth. It matters what you learn, because that's something we can all grow into, which means every human being can become a better leader than they currently are. And that's something we need to do. We need to learn to lead.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned that it's a skill, because that's the premise in terms of for this podcast platform, is the fact that a lot of these skills that are the perception is that these are you either born with them or not, and the intent is that we can actually develop that. And as a leadership instructor, what are some of the first steps that we can take to learn to become better leaders?
Yeah, I think the first hurdle is something we just talked about, is that first recognition that you are a leader. You don't need to wait to get promoted to have a team of people working for you to embrace that. So if I have brand new frontline individual contributors in the first month of their job where it's just them, they are leaders, even if they're just leading themselves. And so I think the first step in that process is recognizing you are a leader. And that is true universally for everybody. And the second thing is, and it really is how I framed the book, is there are things that leaders need to do, behaviors, actions, things you do, and there's a way you need to think, the mindsets. And I think if you look at it and go, okay, I'm a leader, how do I learn to get better? Well, the answer is there's things you have to do, and there's things you have to create in terms of your mind as a framework of how you think. And so it's really a blend of actions and mindsets, behaviors and a way of thinking. And when you see that and go, oh, I can list what those are. I can work on those things. And if I'm struggling here, I can focus on where my shortfalls are, and I can pay some attention and apply some resources to that. Everybody is a leader. It's how a leader thinks and how a leader acts is what makes us better leaders. Those are all skills that can be defined, taught, and learned.
Yeah, that's a defining, identifying, recognizing that part is so important, because we think that we are in a role perhaps that we are waiting, to be told what to do, without
Yeah.
realizing that we could actually take that initiative to kind of lead ourselves, as you mentioned. What happens when things don't go the right way, and particularly if you're a leader in a team,
Yeah.
when you lose your composure, how are some of the recommendations that you have when it comes to dealing with either significant stress or teams managing conflict overall as well?
Yeah, another great question. And my answer is kind of a universal answer, which is to tell everybody, and you and I both know this, is that things aren't going to go great all the time. There are going to be problems. That is just the nature of life. That's the nature of leadership, is you should just be prepared. At some point, you're going to be dealt a challenge, a setback, a shortfall. You're going to deal with challenges. That is the nature of what it means to lead. Now, the good news is we have a really cool playbook that we teach that's available to everyone. It's called extreme ownership. If something goes wrong with your team, take responsibility for it. Our natural tendency, especially I think it's common in the beginning of our leadership journey, our human nature is, when to see a problem, is to deflect the ownership of that, deflect the blame, look for a little bit of excuse, try to push that off so you don't maybe look bad. Our natural tendency there usually is a problem. It's usually going to lead us to do the wrong thing. I'm going to point the finger. I'm going to place blame. I'm going to push it on other people. I'm going to say it's the team's fault, not mine. And every time I fall short of taking ownership, I really make things worse for myself over time. So if you have a problem, a setback, a failure, an underperformance for you and your team, the first step is to recognize this is on you. Take ownership of that. And I think what the power of ownership is, it's a blueprint for how do you deal with setbacks? How do you deal with challenges? How do you deal with chaos? How do you deal with failure, uncertainty? And the answer is start with you. Start with what you can own, what you can do better, what you can improve, how you can contribute to that fix. And what you'll see most of the time is that will be reciprocated by your teammates. They'll start to do the same thing. Now you have all these different people saying, hey, I screwed this up. I can fix this. Hey, that was my mistake. I can improve on that. And all of a sudden, these problems start to improve and get better. And the exact opposite is true. If I start pointing the finger, placing blame, my team will also reciprocate. And they'll be pointing the finger, placing blame, which means there's almost no chance of this problem improving. So the real answer is quite simply, the team's struggling. That's on you as a leader. Take ownership and look to start solving the problem. Your team will very likely respond in kind.
That's a great advice because as managers, leaders, we think that it's correcting that person, whoever did the thing that we need to correct, but just kind of automatically taking that ownership of like, okay, it's on you as that person leading the
Yes.
team to take that responsibility. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Being in cultures that the finger pointing starts and everybody starts finger pointing, and it becomes not such a great culture in
Oh,
regards
it's
to.
terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah. So, what as a leadership instructor, any particular things that you regularly see with non-military organizations, repeated mistake that you see that they could just go ahead and have a simple fix for that?
Yeah, and one thing I'll say is the longer I've been doing this, and I retired 9 years ago almost, and I've been a leadership instructor really this entire time since I transitioned out. I've worked with literally thousands and thousands of companies across every industry you could possibly imagine, every single one. And what I've discovered is that the challenges they face are really no different from the same ones we saw in the military, because what you're dealing with is the people challenges. And one of the things that I think permeates, certainly I wrote this and there's some very specific elements to it, but the concept of humility is really central to all the things that we teach. And every problem we see in an organization, private sector, public companies, to include military, and it's really all of them, is most of the time when we see a problem in an organization, there is a connection to ego involved. And our egos really undermine our willingness to see the problem for what it is, see our ability to recognize how we've contributed to that problem, and seeing the responsibility we have to try to fix that problem. A lot of times we get brought in and someone will come and say, hey, Dave, my team's underperforming. Our revenue is down. We're not doing as good a job. What's wrong with my team? How can I fix them? How can you teach them to do a better job? And I'm paraphrasing, but ultimately what the answer is really not about them. It's what you just said before, is it's what are we not doing as leaders in that position? And when you change that mindset, the natural action is your ego gets put into check. Your ego gets lowered. Your ego is less able to convince you that you're right and they're wrong. And all of a sudden that leads to that open-mindedness. It leads to that willingness to change. It leads to that willingness to listen. And you can see all these things are connected, but our egos play such an outsized influence in these things that in almost every case, every problem we see is often connected to an ego that says, this is not my fault. This is their fault. They're the problem. They need to change. You got to come in and fix that. And then the discoveries are like, oh man, I have this backwards. I'm the
Yeah.
problem. And when teams do that, you see the organizations, they start to improve.
Yeah, very true. In regards of come help us fix them, and then it becomes that nope, they need to fix themselves in regards to that.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time to write to have written the book as well, because I think it's a great insights into the life of the military, and also all the lessons that you can take that the viewers, the readers can take from that. So what's the best way for people to contact you if they have any questions or just want to reach out to you?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me on. I loved your questions. It was great to talk to you about this stuff. if you want to get a hold of me, it's pretty easy. Just go to echelonfront.com. That's our company's website, and I'm on there as one of the instructors. Very easy to find. There's some social media. I do a lot of LinkedIn stuff, so you can find me just as long as you spell my name right, David Berke, Berke. You can certainly find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm pretty good on responding, but not perfect. So if you reach out to me, I should get to it within a day. But I'd love to hear from anybody on this Echelon Front, or just go to my LinkedIn page.
All right. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yadi, this is great. Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
Thanks.